Well, I'm sitting at home.
Uneducated, unfiltered, unhinged. This is the Mangina Dialogues. We at it again with your host Nick Scopes and the Gregolicious. You know how we do, cause you know we keeping it gangster and silly. Unplugged like a full swung titty. Bout get jitty, cause you know we down to the nitty and the gritty. And we make shit sound so damn pretty. Yeah, cause this unhinged comedy. And right now you're in the mix. So get ready, cause we bout to get it poppin'. And we ain't stopping.
Uneducated, unfiltered, unhinged. This the Mangina Dialogues. We at it again.
Hello and welcome to the Mangina Dialogues. I am your host, Nick Scopes.
And I'm the Gregolicious.
And today we have with us comedian, not Bill Burr, Jay Light. What's up, Jay?
Hey, I'm good. How you guys doing?
Good. How's LA?
It is okay. I feel attacked by your theme song, and it's about to start raining soon. So I feel like you brought that to me.
At least it's not germs.
You know what? It's true. We are hermetically sealed in here. Nothing's getting in.
What do you think about that song? Do you enjoy it or what?
It sounded like hold music to a rap station that is about to go under. I feel like it's oh man. I thought it was over, and then the singing started, and I was like, all right, I don't know what I'm in for, but we'll just sit with it. We'll deal with it.
That's the best description I think we've ever heard, and most accurate. Totally the most accurate, dead on. We were going for that.
It's I feel like I can accept things a lot easier since we're in the middle of a goddamn pandemic, and your theme song was the first thing to make me feel anger in a couple days. So good job, guys.
Well played.
Yes.
I think we have a couple of theme songs. We chose hip hop today. That you're from Texas. We figured it's the most appropriate. Maybe next time we'll pull out the country western version.
Oh, I would love to hear how that sounds. I bet you. I feel like it's probably marginally better, which is good enough.
Well, it probably would never be better. And the best part about our theme song now is that I usually, when I'm in Texas, like to blast it while I'm driving down the highway in a Prius with truck nuts.
Oh, there you go. That's a smart move. Man who knows how Texas should be.
Yeah. Nick probably doesn't know that that's a bit I saw of yours that I thought was direct reference, but also incredibly accurate because last year I drove from New Orleans to Austin and said out loud to myself at several times, like, why would that car have truck nuts?
Yeah, they just don't need it.
Yeah. I guess they live in a world of being ironic on purpose.
I feel like if you got a Fiat with truck nuts, it's just really just to weigh it down.
it's in case it rains, it keeps your differential in check.
Yeah, if you're taking too hard of a turn, you won't roll over. The truck nuts are going to be your counterweight.
Yeah. Anyway, enough of that. So, one of the most interesting things to me, not about you, but just in the comedy scene in general, is the whole like roast battles, right? And you host a show at the Comedy Store, twice a month?
Well, I do. I don't host it. I gotta get
produce it.
But I produced it for a number of years, and I'm doing. I've been on the Comedy Central version of it. I've done the battles in LA a lot, but yeah, we do it every Tuesday. I would say monthly, but I have no sense of time anymore. But yeah, technically it's every Tuesday.
And when it comes to producing that show, like what does that entail? Do you pick the lineups and the people who are going to go against each other, or you just promote? Like, what does that entail at the Comedy Store?
Well, it's changed a little bit over the years. When I was really doing the most of the producing, there was a section of stand-up and battles. And my main job was to organize the stand-up and just get the lineup set for that. Not necessarily booking so much. That was more of a split between me and Moses. And the battles, I would basically set myself. I would, if people wanted to battle, I would say, all right, who's your opponent? Because I don't want to deal with all that extra work of trying to find opponents for people.
Right.
And I would set the order for the battles. And then we've got like a blog that's got sort of previews and recaps of all the shows. I was overseeing that. We make sure we got our rankings in order for this little weird sport that has been cultivated over the past 6, almost 7 years.
Right.
And now that we're in quarantine mode, we're doing a weekly show on Friday night. So I'm actively taking a producing role in that again. So I'm basically just making sure everything's in order for that.
And how do people see that show?
You can watch that on Roast Battle's YouTube channel or on Periscope. We stream it to there and onto Twitch as well.
Oh, that's sweet.
Awesome. Now, how'd you get your start in comedy, Jay? Why'd you start doing stand-up?
Well, I got started in stand-up. I was in high school. A good buddy of mine bought that book, The Comedy Bible, the Judy Carter book, and it said that you should get a comedy buddy, so I volunteered to do stand-up with him. And I started actually, like, my first times ever getting on stage, I was in college. I was in North Carolina, sort of the middle of nowhere, but I was close enough to places that had open mics and comedy clubs so I could get up regularly enough. And then after I was in North Carolina for a couple years after I graduated college, I moved straight to LA. I figured I'd be working. I had a film degree. I figured I'd be working in production, doing PA bullshit and running around and all that kind of stuff. And then I actually wound up getting jobs at comedy clubs. So I worked at this place called Flappers for a couple of years, and then I worked at the Comedy Store for like 5 years. But I got it all started back in North Carolina just because a friend of mine was like, hey, I need somebody to do this with. And then he doesn't even do it anymore, funny enough. So I just kind of stuck it out.
When your job that you had at the Comedy Store, how did you get that job? Was it you just like waited in line with the 400 people that applied that day, or was it because you
pretty much? I had a guy on the inside looking out for me. He told me, because I'm originally from Dallas, and this other dude from Dallas told me that they had job openings. There were a couple people who had just got fired or quit, and so I auditioned again. I was, you got to go up on potluck if you want to try and get in at the Comedy Store at all, whether it's being a door guy or being passed as a paid regular there, or even sort of in like the middle tier of what they call friends and family. So I went up for the booker, who at the time was Tommy, and he finally had seen my set, and I'd probably gone up on potluck like 5 or 6 times before then. And I came by, hung out later on in the week, talked to him, told him I wanted to work there. He told me to come back the next week on Monday, and he did that for 2 more weeks. And then I got a call from him, and he hired me. I was the last door guy he ever hired before he got fired.
Just made it.
And yeah, just right under the wire.
And how long did it take you from working at the door to move up to the stage, like on a regular basis?
Oh, well, once you start working there, you can perform immediately. The whole premise of potluck is that it's the employee's showcase. So as soon as you get in there, you have a guaranteed spot on potluck every week. So I was going up on Mondays in the OR, and then I was helping out do stuff with Roast Battle. So I would get up every couple of weeks there, either doing a battle or doing a spot on the pre-show. Eventually, I think it was my last year working there, they started implementing the door guys going up on opening shows rule. And so I was getting up more for that. And then I actually got officially put into the development system about 6 months after I started working there. Maybe 3 months. I forget what there's like a probationary period before you can officially start calling in to do spots.
Right.
once you're a door guy. But after that happened, I got put in. So I'm in the development system over there now, and so I usually get spots there a couple times a month.
Right. Yeah, I think I saw you open a show maybe about a year ago. Would that make sense?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I quit working there last February, so about a year ago sounds right.
Yeah, I think it was actually in February. It was. It had to be February because that's the show. I was there. I saw a night that Brody closed out and did like an hour from like 1 to 2 a.m. And I think that was when the show I saw you open. It was February though, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been. I opened up some main room shows in February, so that sounds like when we would have crossed paths theoretically.
Yeah, that was an awesome night. Obviously tragic. So, when it comes to the battles, and obviously I've seen yours, how much preparation goes into doing that? I mean, obviously I imagine there's a lot of different levels of prep between the ones that are, on Comedy Central compared to the ones that you're doing at the Comedy Store. But how much time are you spending on that before you do those battles?
Well, I think everybody's got different styles. What I personally like to do is I talk to whoever I'm battling. We sit down, we grab some coffee or meal, chat, get some details, get some dirt on each other. And then from there, we'll start writing jokes. That'll usually about 2 weeks out. And I do a lot of research. I like doing deep dives. So I listen to people's podcast episodes that they've been on, and I watch their stand-up and try and maybe find if there's like news articles out there about them. I read up on those. And I used to be way, way more intense even, where I would start my process to get ready to battle somebody like a month out. And that, after a while, just wasn't sustainable, and I couldn't, because you're not able to focus on stand-up during that. You're focusing so much on all the things you're going to say about one person, you can't write your own jokes. It totally takes that away. So over time, I've sort of scaled back. I still do all the research and stuff and make sure that I'm trying to write good jokes and creative jokes that aren't the most basic, and that's served me pretty well. And now I'm even getting to the point where it's like, I can probably crank out enough roast jokes about somebody in a week, as long as I have enough material to work off of.
That's awesome, man. What see, I had a feeling the roasts were like a little premeditated, because sometimes it seems like it's just coming off the cuff. Have you ever been a part of roast battles where they're like, we're just going to freestyle it, you're going against this person?
I have not done one with that little prep. The closest I've done, last summer I went to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and they have a roast battle show out there every night of the festival. So it's like a month long, and people are battling night after night after night. And I signed up when I was out there. I did like 4 nights in a row of battles. And so I would meet up with the person like earlier in the day and get some info on them and write jokes. But it was very much on the fly compared to a couple weeks of prep like I would usually be doing. I've never done one where it's pure off the cuff. There have been some that's happened like that. I remember back in the day, we had some where they would bring on like if they had a tiebreaker, they would bring on a celebrity who was sitting in the VIP section and bring them down. So one time, Too Short got speed roasted. They had Dave Chappelle come down and get speed roasted one time. I think John Mayer did one time, but I never did any of those myself. I was just watching some other people do those.
That's awesome. Do you find at all, is there, like, for example, a comic that's very good, like doing their set, and is horrible at roasts, and vice versa? Do you see that at all?
I have definitely seen that. I see less of the comic who's really good at roasting and bad at stand-up than I used to. It's one of those things where now I see people who try stand-up, they try roasting, and they're good stand-ups, but they just can't transfer it over to roasting for whatever reason. I think there's a lot of persona in roasting and stand-up that doesn't necessarily line up. Like, roasting to me is all about being a really, really great joke writer.
Right.
And roast battle, on top of it, has this layer of wrestling that's kind of there. It's kind of, got people who are sort of slotted into roles as faces or heels. And, there's a couple comics now who are doing the show who really hone in on playing a very specific character during a roast battle that I might not necessarily see them do during the regular stand-up, which is sometimes to their benefit, sometimes not. Sometimes those people need to take that persona into their stand-up in order to be watchable. But for the most part, if you're decent enough at joke writing and a stand-up who's more focusing on the joke instead of just playing out the persona, then you're probably going to do fine in roast battle, unless, of course, you just wind up shitting the bed and don't know how to say mean things about another person, which everybody should figure out how to do. It's really not that hard.
I do it to Greg every day.
Every day.
It's good. Everybody, I remember when I first started doing it, I got hung up for a little while because I was like, well, I'm supposed to be this nice person. And I don't want to say mean things about somebody. And then I was like, oh, it's just a joke writing exercise. It doesn't really matter. But, I mean, that got me into trouble sometimes. There was a girl I was dating one time. We were doing this sort of like weird long distance relationship thing. And I sent her a video of me battling. And she was horrified because I was making jokes about a guy's dead brother. And she was like, how could you say stuff like this? And I was like, it's for a show. We agreed that we were going to do stuff like this.
Yeah, you guys talked beforehand, weeks beforehand, and they were like, hey, this is what we're going to do.
Do you ever go over the jokes in advance, like with the person you're battling? So, like, maybe not the specific joke, but the premise, so they have an idea of what you're going to come at them with, so they could come back at you on it?
No. I'd never do something like that unless it was something. The only time I won't go over a joke, but if somebody, when we're meeting up in advance, will say that a topic is off limits, then I won't worry about making jokes about that. And for the most part, in roast battle, people are open books.
Right.
There's a couple premises that might go a little too far, but those are few and far between in the world of roast battle.
Right. Like, what would that be? Like, what's an example of something that could go too far?
Well, I know there's a guy who had, for a good chunk of his battle career, he was having people make jokes about him getting molested as a kid. And those are, totally fine. But then there's the line that he drew was, you can make a joke about it, but you can't say who did it.
Right.
So there were a few times where people would make a joke and say, oh, so-and-so molested you. And that is the one, because he doesn't want people, if somebody watched that battle, he didn't want like anybody who would know that person to find out that that's who it was.
Right. So
it's just that, but that's really one of the few examples that I know.
Right. So when you're battling people, is it easier or harder to roast someone that you're like friends with, not friendly with, but like a close friend or someone that you're on a better, friendly terms with than just someone you know from the club scene?
Oh, it's way easier. Way far and away easier. I think that if you can't even write good, mean jokes about your friends, then you don't have any business being involved in the show at all.
Right.
That's a great
I find
point.
it harder to battle somebody who I don't know that well, because I don't feel that sense of comfort of like, all right, I can say this about you, and you're not going to be mad about it.
Right.
I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to ask anyway. Do you enjoy roast battles more than actually performing?
Stand up, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, it's different. The thing with roast battle, my friend Anna Valenzuela said this once, and so credit to her on this, but the roast battle is basically like the heroine of comedy. So if you do it right, it feels great, but you're chasing that high again so quick after. And stand-up, I find, is a little bit more easy to regulate, because in stand-up there, you're sort of, you got more control over what you're doing and what the audience is going to react to and how they're going to react. Roast battle, you don't know, because they might like your jokes, they might fucking hate your jokes, or they might like your jokes, but they like the other person's jokes better. So it's a real crapshoot compared to regular stand-up, where it at least feels like there's some sense of regularity that you can deal with.
Yeah.
I prefer stand-up in the long run, but if I have a good roast battle coming up, I do have a hard time chasing that one down.
Yeah,
after the fact.
Me and Nick had a show a couple months ago that we incorporated a roast battle into the entire show. We didn't roast each other. We had people, people roast each other and as a battle. And the reaction that we got from the crowd afterwards was two different things. Either people liked it because it made them incredibly uncomfortable, or didn't like it because it made them incredibly uncomfortable. Like, what do you think is the reaction the audience should leave with out of a good battle?
I think after a good battle, you should leave the audience walking away and they're thinking, wow, that was cathartic. Because there's something about roast jokes, and in particular the hyper-personal nature of roast battle, that lends itself to writing some really dark, really almost unsafe jokes. And if you can get people to laugh at jokes like that, then it's a beautiful thing. Because it just feels like a weight, and it feels like there's something lifted off of you, compared to if they're not laughing at those jokes, then you probably don't want them in your corner anyway.
Yeah.
I think that people should be able to laugh at the dark shit and the horrible, messed up shit. And roast battle is a great place for people to be able to do that. But sometimes not everybody gets it. Like one time we had a lady heckle us during the show. There were some battlers. There's a guy making jokes. There's a guy and a girl battling each other. And the guy was making the pretty standard jokes you'd make against a girl, like calling her a slut or something like that. And this lady started yelling out, you sexist fuck. And everybody in the crowd turned on her, and the judges and the battlers turned on her, because they're like, you don't understand what the show that you walked into is.
Yeah.
The whole premise of the show is we're glorifying all of that, sexism, racism, and homophobia and xenophobia in order to make fun of it.
Yeah.
God,
so if you think we're endorsing that, then get out of here.
There's nothing I hate more than when people just don't get it. They don't in any setting, not just stand up, but they just don't understand what's happening in their surroundings. It's infuriating.
And then they make it known.
Yeah, they make it known and ruin everyone else's time.
I don't understand this, so I'm going to ruin your good time.
Yeah, I can't deal with people like that, man. Can't do it.
It's like hecklers, They want to be part of the show, and they don't get that the other 200 people in the audience don't give a fuck who they are. It's like,
right.
Shut up. So let's talk about your podcast.
Let's talk about it. Blockbusting.
How did you come up? I mean, it's honestly, I love it. It's genius. It's such a cool premise. But how did you come up with that?
I was talking to my buddy Frank Castillo. Shout out to Frank, great roast battler, my best friend. He and I were talking because we both, after we'd done roast battle season 2, we were like, well, we should try and maybe capitalize on the fact that more people know who we are now. Let's think about doing some podcasts. And I went to film school. I love movies, and I wanted to do something that was kind of in the vein of the roasting and making fun of stuff that I'd sort of developed and learned that I was pretty good at over doing roast battle, and combine that with movies. And I didn't really know how to do that until I was like, well, what can I talk about? Because there's tons of podcasts out there about people making fun of movies and talking about bad movies, and I didn't think that was quite right. I figured what I wanted to do was something that was a little bit more personal. And the thing that I knew was as far as I'm concerned, the way that you think about a movie is totally unique to you. So you might think a movie is bad even if other people think it's good. Like, I freaking hate Lawrence of Arabia. Lawrence of Arabia, as far as I'm concerned, is slow, unwatchable garbage. But I know that a lot of people think it's one of the best movies of all time. So other people have opinions like that. That's what you can come talk about on Blockbusting. You talk about movies you hate and why you hate them.
So, what of all the episodes you guys have done, you've done, what is the most surprising to you when someone's like, "Ugh, I hate that fucking movie"?
I think some of the ones I try to allow people to like have their opinions, even if it's a movie that I like. Like I had a buddy of mine talk about how he hated The Dark Knight, and The Dark Knight, I think, is not just one of the great superhero movies, but a really great crime movie too. And he hated it because he's a big comic book guy, and he doesn't like the way that Batman is portrayed in that compared to the way he is in the comics. And he doesn't. He used his episode to talk about the whole trend of doing these gritty, realistic comic book movies that aren't really gritty or realistic. They're just kind of tropey and weird.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, I do have somebody on who hates a movie that I love, and I try and convince them to change their mind. I just did one about Swiss Army Man, which is a very weird movie, but I loved it. And my buddy Yorgo, who I had on, just didn't fucking understand the movie. And so I was like, all right, hey, Ron, let me try and fix your brain on this one. And I think I turned him around. So those are a couple times that come to mind.
What's the general feeling on Shawshank Redemption? I
had somebody on and talk about not liking Shawshank Redemption, and kind of made me. When I watched it, I was like, oh yeah, I see all the things that you will hate about this before we even started talking about it. It's real schmaltzy. It's a real movie that's kind of like for guys to feel okay about crying next to their dad. That's the kind of movie Shawshank is. Like, you're going to hang out with your dad, you're going to be hungover watching it on TNT, and you're going to look over and he's going to be a little misty-eyed, but it's okay.
So then my question to that person that didn't like Shawshank Redemption is, do they find themselves watching it every single time it's on TBS or at Christmas or whenever it is that you stumble upon Shawshank Redemption, like the majority of everyone else in the world who puts it on and then can't turn it off until the movie's over from whatever point you happen to catch it?
Exactly. That's the thing. Shawshank is one of those movies that's like, you can't help but watch it when it's on, because you're like, all right, this is good enough. This will get the job done, even if you're tired of it. Watching Shawshank is like masturbating to a porn VHS. Like, it's kind of grainy and not your favorite pick, but there's something about the acting in it. You're just like charmed.
He gets the job done.
Are any of your identify what we were talking about like friends that are really big into comic books, or like they're really big into, like, say, Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, then those movies come out and they're all like, it's not the same, you should read the books, the movies suck, blah 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 blah. Do you ever get like annoyed with that, where you're like, listen, this is just for entertainment, it's a movie? Like, I know it's not exactly like the comic. Like, that shit drives me nuts.
It drives me nuts too, because I think I've never been a big comic book guy. I've never really. Same. I'm not a big superhero movie person in general, and I feel like now they're not making superhero movies for comic book nerds. They're making superhero movies for everybody else, and so that's going to make a lot of people mad instead of just letting it be what it is. Like the thing you like, but don't shit on my liking of the thing just because it's not exactly fine-tuned to your particular interest.
I think that's very prevalent in the superhero movies.
Super prevalent.
Like, where, like, I'm not a comic book guy. I've never read a comic book in my life, and I'm also not really an avid viewer of superhero movies, but there are some over time that I like. And anytime I've ever been in a conversation with someone who is an avid comic book freak over whatever it is, and usually it's around Batman, because there seems like there's an abundance of them. I was like, yeah, I really liked the first Batman movie in 1988. And I got such an earful of why that movie was not authentic and why it sucked. I literally just, in the middle of the conversation, just was like, walked away. I was like, okay, you fucking crazy person.
Something about the people who love Batman, I feel like there is, like, if you're looking at Batman from the comic book perspective, I feel like there is something wrong with you if you identify with and love Batman that much.
Yeah.
Batman is just like a rich emo asshole, and why do you want to support that guy? He's brooding.
Parents
He's
got
weird.
Killed. Damn it, he has dead parents.
Lives in a cave as a butler.
He's got a bunch of, roving around dudes, the young boy sidekicks. He's got a paralyzed lady who he's friends with. I mean, he sounds like a decent guy, but then you look at his background, you're like, well, I don't want to hang out with this guy. He seems like a fucking drag.
And then at the end of the day, probably responsible for this fucking coronavirus.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Wrong.
100%. Trace that back to the Batcave.
It's not just Batgirl.
Now, this is probably going to be so hard to narrow down, but what is one of we'll go comedy. I'll give you a genre so it's easier to narrow down. What's one of your favorite comedy movies of all time?
I love, first one that comes to mind is a UHF, Weird Al's movie from, I think, 88, 89.
Yeah, that's a classic movie. That movie's so good.
What's it called? Say it again.
UHF.
Weird Al Yankovic.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, he takes over the TV station.
Yep.
Yeah.
Michael Richards is in it before pre-Seinfeld.
Yep.
Holy shit, man! Oh my god, I'm having a big flashback right now. I remember this movie.
It's great.
Holy shit!
A classic and ahead of the time.
Mine would be Fletch.
It's Chevy Chase, right?
Yeah.
I've never seen that one. I gotta get in.
Oh man,
more of his old stuff. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, Fletch that's a classic. I mean, for one, classic comedy movie, but top 3 Chevy Chase movie. Well, I mean, that's hard to do, but I would put it up there because it's obviously my favorite movie. But so good, you must see it. It's so funny. Damn it.
That's my quarantine watch list.
Yeah.
I think my first comedy movie I really remember seeing and then like everyone loved and everyone started quoting was Old School. That's what I remember.
Oh yeah.
That's your first comedy movie?
No, it's the first movie
13
comedy
years
movie I ever
old?
saw, but that's the first one that like I remembered very well. And the quotes literally just all of high school. People just quoted that movie. And even into college and a little bit now. It just doesn't end. That's one of those movies. I feel like it started like I don't know.
I'm going to get you a Speaker City t-shirt.
Vince Vaughn's so good in that. I love how, and you could test this a little bit. Vince Vaughn is just Vince Vaughn in every movie. He doesn't really do characters or anything like that.
You know what? You guys might not know this movie, but I was watching it early the other morning. Have you ever heard of Living in Oblivion? It came out in like the early 90s. It was
no, never.
It was it's like kind of a documentary. I mean, it's not a documentary, but it's about guys making an independent film. And oh man, the guy from that mob show on HBO that took place in Atlantic City. He was in Fargo.
Sopranos?
Oh my God, what's his name?
Ewan McGregor?
No. He was in he was one of the bad guys in Fargo, the movie Fargo. And
Steve Buscemi.
Steve Buscemi. So Steve Buscemi.
Broadway Empire.
Yeah. So he's the main guy in this movie, and Vince Vaughn. It must have been his very first movie. He played like a driver, had no lines, and the camera panned to him like 3 or 4 times in a very awkward way in this one scene. I'm like, it's Vince Vaughn. Is he going to talk? It's Vince Vaughn. Nothing. But it's a great movie. You should check it out since you're a film guy. It's a great movie.
Living in Oblivion.
Yeah, Living in Oblivion, like 1994-ish, mid-90s. Really great movie. Anyway, so let's talk about, before we wrap, Crashing.
Oh, Crashing. All right.
So you're a writer? How was your involvement in the show?
So they brought me on and a couple other roast guys to write jokes for the roast battle for that season 2 finale.
Right.
That was I love that scene in particular. That when he's roasting Tony Hinchcliffe, he says he looks like a guy who got bit by a by a zombie but is trying not to tell anyone. I thought that was the best. That was the best.
That episode was so much because they called us up. Apatow was a fan of the show, and so he reached out to Jeff and Moses to do a roast battle on the show. And Pete had judged roast battle before too, so they were familiar with the world of it. But they wanted to have some actual roast battle dudes on to write the jokes. And so they called us in. We did like a week's worth of work on it. And it really does capture the feeling, like that scene at the very, very end when Pete's battling Mike Lawrence and Mike is just decimating him. And it's just like that slow zoom on Pete's face as he's just like, you can feel how dead inside he is.
Yeah.
That's how it feels when someone's really getting you in a roast battle. It's just like, I was like, oh, I cringed feeling that because it was like, okay, they got it. They nailed it.
And is that your first TV writing gig?
That was my first proper TV writing gig. And I had a few after that. In all sorts of various kinds of shows, I've done a little bit writing for some, sketch and sort of like roasty kind of shows for historical roasts. I did a little game show writing. I was working on MasterChef right before we got production shut down. So the writing stuff has been all over the place. But Crashing got me on my feet with the first proper credit.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite shows of the last couple of years for sure. I mean,
it was a really great show.
Yeah.
It did get a little too Apatow-y for its own good by the very end. It got a little too. We're going to turn this into a rom-com,
right?
By the end, but the way that they actually documented the stand-up part, I was like, okay, yeah, this feels right.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with you, but I could watch Jamie Lee do that all day. I like her a lot.
She's great.
She's so funny. All right. Well, listen, man, we really appreciate the time and talking to you. And
for sure.
Battles are, obviously they are ridiculously popular, and I love watching them and feeling awkward and hysterical all at the same time. Anything you want to make sure we plug out there to people listening and get out there for you besides everything we talked about?
Definitely just keep your eyes peeled on the stuff we talked about. Blockbusting podcast comes out every Monday. I got a Patreon for that, so if you want to be a little bit more on the inside track and talk to me about movies you hate and get a newsletter and get part of my film watching club, you can subscribe to that. Patreon.com/blockbusting. All the other stuff you can find me at Diet J on Twitter and Instagram, and then Roast Battles at Roast Battle on Twitter and Instagram. And that's where we're posting all of our shows and stuff we're doing during our time off.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll post all that stuff in the show notes too.
For sure.
Make sure people can find you. All right, man. Really appreciate it. Definitely look forward to seeing you in LA, hopefully sooner than later, and keeping the big earthquake away so I don't get blamed for it by another person.
Sounds good.
And, obviously, most importantly, stay healthy and safe over the next couple months.
Thanks. You too, guys.
All right, man. Really appreciate it.
Jay.
Thanks a lot,
Have
dude.
A good one, man.
Take care.
All right. Thank you all, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.